of 0.5, I created 5 new bugs in the course of correcting 10 bugs. So the ratio 5/10, which is 0.5, is characteristic of what's happening in the code in terms of bugs when I work on it. Now, the 3 simulations that you see here are such that the second simulation has an error feedback ratio bigger in 20% than the first one. And the third one has an error feedback ratio bigger 10% than this one. As you can see, the second simulation is almost double in time than the first one. And the third one is almost double in time from the previous one. So there is a region here where things deteriorate on us very, very fast in terms of how long a time it would take us to fix the code because of the error feedback ratio. I would like to ask you for a few guesses as to the first one here. What do you think is the error feedback ratio on this one? Is it 0.9? Is it 0.1? Is it 0.5? What is the point in which time things start deteriorating on me?
0.01.
I'm sorry?
0.01.
0.01, okay. I would like to have a couple or 3 more suggestions.
0.2.
0.2, okay.
0.5.
0.5. The answer is 0.3. Namely, you have this graph with error feedback ratio of 0.3. This one is 0.36, and this one is 0.396. So what happens, the instability in the code becomes really devastating in terms of the time that it takes you to remove bugs once you are at an error feedback ratio of 0.3. Now, a very legitimate question is, if we go back to the previous graph, at what point in time can one expect to be at an error feedback ratio of 0.3? And while I am not aware of specific studies which identified the answer to this question, let me show you some of the devastating results which happens when you are there. What you see here are 2 quotes taken from Capers-Jones. The first one, he looked at 3 equivalent programs of 1,000 function points each. And he looked at 5-year life cycle costs for a poor project, for a so-so project, and for a good project. And as you see, over 5 years, it's almost a ratio of 2 to 1. Namely, the good team was able to do it at about 1.3 million total life cycle cost. The company which has a project which was doing poor on the methods took them $2.3 million. So in terms of how much it costs us, once the debt accrues, the costs are very, very significant. And if you take a look at it, compare it to the value, Capers-Jones' assessment is that such projects, namely those he calls lagging projects, take them 3 to 5 years until they stop being economically viable. So think about it and take a look at the portfolio of your project in your companies. I bet you there are many projects, or many products to be precise, that live for more than 3 or 4 or 5 years. And unless the standards of your development are such the technical debt is being kept to the minimum, those are not really economically viable anymore. So we have plenty of data to indicate the seriousness of the phenomenon. And I will demonstrate now how we can be proactive about this phenomenon. Namely, to have a notion that I have a technical debt of a week or 2 weeks or the like is one thing. To be able to measure it in quantitative terms and to be able to use the numbers in order to govern my process is a different story altogether. I will start with the picture, the graph that you see here, which talks about the components of technical debt or some typical components of technical debt. Unit test coverage is usually a big one. Complexity of the code is another major contributor. Duplication, when the programmers copied in a rush from one place to another, is another source of trouble. Violations of various coding rules is the fourth one. And lack of comments, which makes the code very, very difficult to comprehend in the future, is a fifth one. There are others that you can get, but I would say in terms of the usual suspects, I would say those 5 are usually top on the list. Now, if you take a look here, we are talking about those 5 being split in this pie chart. So when you take a look at such a pie chart, you have an immediate realization that the number one component in terms of the technical debt in this particular case is a lack of unit test coverage. And the data that you see here gives you an assessment that you would need 376 man days to fix the technical debt or to pay it back, and that for a certain cost per person, it's about 187K to be paid back. Now, the importance of the ability to talk about it in financial terms is such that you open the door. Yes, please?
How do you come up with these calculations?
I can barely hear you, I'm sorry.
I mean, all these calculations that you came up with, 187,000 or 45%. So how does, who kind of does those estimates? Like the people who are part of the project, or is there any tools that can give you the data?
I'm terribly sorry. Could you perhaps come here, as I, for one, am not able to get your answer.
Okay, my question is, how do you come up with, this is a particular sample project, right? This 187,000 and 376 man days. So in this particular project, who kind of came up with these estimates? That people who are involved, or is there any tools or something which can give you the data?
The way we came at these figures was by way of combination of static code analysis together with dynamic code analysis. So in terms of defects in the software itself, like duplication or violations of rules, this was done by running analysis on the software or on the software itself. The dynamic behavior, namely the unit test coverage, was calculated by way of actually running the tests, the unit tests, and seeing what they would do. The cost per hour, I think, was set at something like 500, cost per day, something like $500 or the like, and this is a parameter that you can change. So you look at the code in a static manner to see its structure, violations, etc. You look at the code to see how the tests behave with respect to it. And what you see in the pie chart is a breakdown of your technical debt. So once you have this kind of ability to talk about technical debt in terms of dollars, you are really opening the door for a very rich dialogue between technical and non-technical people. Because if you take a look at the 3 statements that are mentioned here, you don't need to know anything whatsoever about coupling or lack of cohesion between methods or any one of the complex technical considerations that programmers use in order to relate to the sources of the technical debt. So this thing of being able to represent technical debt not as a complex set of technical considerations, but as a money equivalent, gives you a situation and the ability for the business to be involved in various technical decisions in a meaningful manner. So for example, one could take a look at a pie chart like that and say, you know what, we are not shipping before the coverage reaches a level of 70%. Or one could say, oh, the duplication would kill us, we are gonna focus on duplication, whatever the decision is. But the key point is, at this level of representation, you have the technical people and the business people being able to speak in a meaningful manner without the need to have a deep knowledge of Java in this case. Now, the very same data can be broken down to more granular levels as indicators for the programmers. For example, if you take a look at this technical debt analysis that we ran on the Cassandra project, which, by the way, is extremely high-quality project, then you can see that in terms of violations of various coding rules, we do have violations. However, we don't have blocking violations, only 0 blocking violations. We have got, however, 34 critical violations that we would be wise to address. And we can break down those and bring them to the level of the individual statements. Namely, we are able to provide the programmers with indications of where the violations are. For example, if statement without braces. Moreover, we can take a look at a set of projects in entirety and provide a heat map, which in this case, size indicates lines of code and color indicates complexity. Complexity goes here all the way from green to red and various shades in between. And one immediate look indicates that this module here has complexity coming through the roof, and probably in terms of our strategy to fix things, we would focus on this one. Last but not least, you can run a time machine on the various elements of technical debt. And what you see here is, again, a time machine that we ran on the Cassandra open source project. As you can see, with release 0.4, the technical debt was at its lowest. However, from release 0.4 pretty much till today, the technical debt rose to the level of 90,000. If you take a look at complexity, not surprisingly, the code became more complex, and probably there is a clear correlation between higher complexity and higher technical debt. The significance of that is that all of a sudden, we can create a time series and then start to run various analytics on the time series. Namely, I can look at trends and be able to see where I'm starting to go in the wrong place and to push back on such tendencies. For example, complexity going up at an early point. Let me now move into how this can be done. Yeah?
Could you answer one quick question?
Sure.
I noticed that you included usability issues in technical debt. Could you tell me how and why you did that?
Frankly, I am not certain what is the precise formula that they are using, so I can look it up. However, the breakdown This was before